Wakey, wakey, folks. It's a brand new day, which means even more depressing news for anyone who hates the establishment. What was supposed to be a gigantic scarlet tsunami sweeping across the United States has been converted into a piddling magenta puddle, with almost every new upstart populist getting beaten into a bloody pulp, metaphorically, by the DC machine. Don't tell me you were expecting something good to happen. It never does. With America deciding that everything is fine, and Canada declaring the same in last year's elections, things are looking pretty bleak for us. But how on earth can that be the case? As someone who stands firm against the mainstream narrative, I have felt this wave of support from across the world, with everyone on every corner of the political spectrum seemingly fed up with standing back and standing by while the economy continues to tank, crime rises, and chaos generally ensues. I mean, seriously, I log into Reddit, of all places, and even Redditors are complaining about politicians doing nothing about crime, housing, and inflation. I check Twitter, I drive through the streets, and there are protesters every day saying Biden or Trudeau have failed. And I think many of you would assume that everyone else is having similar reactions to ourselves. That being that something needs to change, and fast. And yet, this hasn't been borne out at the ballot box. What has happened to the silent majority? What gives? Before I answer that question, I wanted to give a huge thank you to my sponsor that make these lovely rants possible, Noble Gold. Money is broken. Everything's getting more expensive, the government's losing control, and the Fed just seem to be making things worse. Trying to get decent returns on your savings is driving you nuts. Sound familiar? Noble Gold gets it. Completely focused on honesty and education, their team of precious metals experts have helped thousands of worried investors like you to build and preserve wealth through times like these. By giving you direct contact with a single dedicated professional, you get exclusive free access to that help with no hassle or call centers to deal with. Find out why precious metals and IRAs are the answer to inflation and financial contagion. Give the team at Noble Gold a call and join the others who have taken advantage of their offer. They'll guide you through the process and make it easy. And this month, they're gifting a stunning free 3-ounce silver American Virtue coin with every qualified IRA above $20K. You can't go wrong with Noble Gold. Call 877-646-5347 for more, or visit their website, noblegoldinvestments.com. Alright, so before I can get into whether the silent majority are some myth we've created in our minds, I need to get one factor out of the way first. That there may be some naughty business going on with the voting system. As someone who has had a long career on this lovely Google-owned platform, I would never, ever question the validity of any elections which, as we all know, are free, fair, and secure. So let's just operate on that assumption for now, and let's take a look at other potential reasons for the failure of the public to change this crumbling system. And that is perhaps that we are assuming that everyone is a rational actor, assessing the world on a reasonable basis as we are. But what if they're not? That's one big potential problem. If Bob Smith thinks that little bug-eyed aliens are the ones responsible for destroying the economy rather than the globalist financial system, and that by voting blue no matter who, the Democrats will be finally able to crush their intergalactic hold over us, you're never going to be able to convince him otherwise. Obviously, I'm being hyperbolic here, but I'm sure all of you could point to at least one person you know who does not have the best grasp of what is really happening in the world around them. But the likelihood of the entire electorate being full of Bobs believing in our alien overlords isn't that big either. It'll have some effect, but not enough to make a huge difference. The Bobs of the world are the most likely to think voting is a waste of time to begin with. Okay, so then what else could we be dealing with here? Well, if you are someone like me, then you will have countless examples of the mainstream media attempting to gaslight you into believing some absolute nonsense. And the same media tells us that the idea of the silent majority is fake and LGBT, which means it's probably real and heterosexual. But what if we're wrong, and the media are correct that the silent majority does not exist? We cannot simply assume the opposite is true of every single thing the media tells us without having some counter-evidence to back it up. The only problem here, of course, being that some of the only evidence we have for the silent majority is our lying eyes. Remember, believe the polls, not the actions and statements of every single person around you. Seriously though, if you enter into private conversations with 90% of people, no matter their politics, they'll usually end up agreeing at least partially with a number of views that are decried by the establishment as being totally dissident. Immigration, the economy, free speech, the media, you name it. But then these same people turn around and will vote for the exact same liberal elites at the ballot box every election, and will keep enthusiastically parroting the same narrative on their Twitter profiles and at dinners with their liberal friends. Which brings me to what I think may be the crux of this issue. And we've seen this happen before under the totalitarian communist regimes of the Soviet Union and in Eastern Europe satellite states. It's literally 1984. Do you see what I did there? Doublethink, or to use the more precise academic term identified by Russian academic Yuri Glazov, behavioral bilingualism. According to the hilariously named historian Philip Bubier, no snickering in the back there, the Soviet regime in its waning days no longer demanded that people believed the official ideology. It was important simply that they were seen to believe or accept it. Publicly, people were required to express themselves in the correct ideological terms. They were forced to participate in a range of rituals or procedures, not to use the right language and participate in the rituals, not to accept the rules of the game, meant to risk one's career and in some cases the prospect of one's family. This absolutely is no different to now. Just think about the countless careers and lives ruined after someone has come out as being against the current thing. Someone like me could never slip back into normal society without pretending to prostrate myself to the Church of the New Truth and denounce my past views. Any ordinary person who might want to talk about how much they don't like Brandon at the water cooler, or heaven forbid that they're not entirely sure about the vaccine, can have their livelihoods stripped away in an instant, and now their family goes hungry. Just as now, as the Soviet Union was slowly collapsing in itself, among Soviet intellectuals there did not seem to be many true believers left in their circles, and yet they all remained, on the face of it, loyal to the regime. So how could they justify this blatant contradiction? Vladimir Bukovsky, a political dissident, said that there was a constant interior debate within every Soviet citizen. For many, this inner dialogue resulted in attempts to justify conformity. Vladimir Shlepentok, a Soviet-born American professor, suggests that intellectuals had a range of rationalizations to justify compliant behavior, like "I am a patriot" or "dissidents are inferior." This justification of conformity is referred to as hetman. This concept was expanded upon in greater detail by Polish poet Czesław Miłosz. Pronouncing Polish names correctly, as if. In his book, The Captive Mind, borrowing the concept of hetman from the early years of Islam, where Muslims had to hide their true beliefs to avoid persecution, later solidified by Shiites as taqiyya. Ironically, Arthur de Gobineau, a 19th century French diplomat, declared that hetman was being practiced by many in the Islamic world, where people would only pay lip service to Islam. Hetman, according to Miłosz, involves so much more than simply speaking one thing and believing another, but also involves fooling oneself into believing that you are truly acting out of your own free will. Like an actor on a stage, people are putting on a performance so great that after long acquaintance with his role, a man grows into it so closely that he can no longer differentiate his true self from the self he simulates. This deception even becomes a source of happiness for those involved in it. To say something is white when one thinks it black, to smile inwardly when one is outwardly solemn, to hate when one manifests love, to know when one pretends not to know, and thus to play one's adversary for a fool, even as he is playing you for one, these actions lead one to prize one's own cunning above all else. Success in the game becomes a source of satisfaction. As noted by Jacob Mikanowski, hetman is primarily a defensive move, where the individual protects his own sanity against a world around him swarming with contradictions, and where people think they are winning by smugly rebelling internally against the regime while publicly upholding the rules of the game. The only problem being, of course, it doesn't work. Their defense against total degradation is to swindle the devil who thinks he is swindling them, Miloš says. But the devil knows what they think, and he is satisfied. This is what we see today. This outward compliance of the masses is all the regime needs to continue to operate. It doesn't matter if you make a few comments in private with your close friends if you don't do anything about it, and the world will continue to go down the tube. Like in most things, we must look back to those who faced the same repeating problems of history before us and check out what happened to them. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, I give up on pronouncing names. One of the most infamous Russian dissidents of his time wrote all the way back in 1974 that the honest man will neither write nor publish any phrase that, in his opinion, distorts the truth. Václav Havel, the last president of Czechoslovakia and the first president of Czechia, imagined before the fall of communism in the essay The Power of the Powerless, a green grocer who stands up one day and rejects the rituals and breaks the rule of the game. This revolt is an attempt to live within the truth. The Soviet Union fell because people were no longer afraid to speak their mind. But until we reach that point where the lies are unbearable to maintain, we will surely go on slipping further into the abyss of madness. So rather than buying into the hopes of the silent majority coming in to save us and leaving ourselves disappointed every time that they don't come through, we must accept that the silent majority does not matter if it is silent.